Hi chess friends, this is King's Executor and I plan to cover the whole World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen from Norway and Magnus-Anand from India, and this World Championship match is being held in Chennai, India. Well, when I saw the first two games of this World Championship, I decided it is not worthwhile making a video of the first two rounds because these openings were very drawish and quite boring. So very short draws were made twice. This is round 3 and the first really interesting encounter between these two super grandmasters. Carlsen had the white pieces in round 3 here as in round 1 and opened the same way, namely with the very flexible knight f3 here. 50 years ago this move wasn't even considered being a possible first move. You had been taught occupying the center immediately with your pawns with white to attack and not leave the center for black. This opening move, one knight f3, can transpose in many different openings, and it can transpose into the English lines, into the queen pawn games, and in many more. So Anand responded the same way as in round 1, and now both are planning to fianchetto their king bishop. c4 now, and kinda in between move, and this move has a deeper idea than it seems. It looks like a random beginner's move, but that move tries to decoy this pawn, the central pawn, off the center towards the side, and this pawn is not staying there for long. White can take it back with check and takes, and the idea is to have a long scope for the bishop, putting pressure on the black queen side. The second idea is to get a half-open c-file for white's rooks. If you imagine a further development for white, castling short, and then this rook will be able to land on c1 eventually, putting pressure down this half-open c-file. Let's look at it. So the pawn was taken, check, knight c6, stopping the check and developing a piece. And now that pawn isn't going anywhere, so bishop g2, bishop g7, knight out, and the first to have a stable pawn in the center is black here with e5. Of course the knight on c6 isn't protecting e5, but the bishop is, so now black can push e5, which he did, and the pawn was taken. Now what has white achieved with his opening choice? White has got this half-open c-file to work with, a pawn majority in the center, and the question is, what is more important? The space with a single pawn from the black side, the space black has gained, or this potential strong center for black? So if these central pawns get mobile later on, that would be a plus for white. And now knight e7 was played. At first glance, maybe a funny move. Why not knight f6? Well, that would be a mistake because of knight g5. This is a tempo move, tempo gaining move, attacking f7, and after the only move to really prevent any any mating ideas on f7 without losing material is castles. But now white has this idea of taking on c6 twice and winning a pawn. So this is the idea of knight g e7. Now the knight on c6 is protected, and knight g5 and castles protects the pawn, and this knight is protected twice. So castles, and at least this position is still a book line. Castles for black. Another move could have been bishop e6, kicking the queen, and there's no way for white to attack the b7 pawn. After a6 takes and rook a7, the queen is trapped and is lost. But both know this probably, so black just preserved his bishop and castled instead, and maybe thought that he was looking for a better location, maybe in the future, keep it more flexible with the positioning of the pawn. So d3 now, opening the bishop's diagonal here, and h6 to take away the g5 square for knight and bishop from the white side. Bishop d2 connecting rooks, knight d4, and this idea is interesting. It puts pressure onto that e2 pawn. That means that this knight, which protects it for the time being, cannot move without hanging this pawn. So that knight is taken, and that achieves something for Anand. Taking here with the pawn opens the scope of this bishop a little bit more. It gains space because now this pawn is in the opponent's camp, as you can tell, and it restricts this backward e2 pawn. So a rook on e8 would put pressure on that pawn, and that makes this pawn majority rather immobile. So that means that this pawn, one pawn, holds two pawns back, and this is something to work with for a grandmaster. Knight e4, and c6 was played, just dropping back. Of course, this bishop wants to be developed soon. That would leave that b7 pawn hanging, maybe with some ideas of bishop takes b7. So c6 must be played at some point. But there could be an alternative here with king h7 protecting g6, because the plan would be here to push f5, and after rook fc1, making use of the trump of white's position, the half open c-file. f5 now kicking the knight, but knight c5 would now attack the b7 pawn twice with bishop and knight. So c6 to keep that bishop a little bit at home. And now it looks as if white could gain the bishop pair with this nice move. But this is not as nice as it looks, because after bishop takes and queen takes, there is knight d5, and that cuts the queen's retreat, and this is rather risky for white. So white would have to take on d5 which now makes clear that there's no bishop pair for either side. And after rook e8, an intermediate move, there's only queen f7, and after rook e7, queen g8 to save the queen. And now what we have is, after king f1, protecting the e2 pawn, a position which is probably a bit better for black. The reason is black has more space, black has pressure down the e-file, black has the c6 pawn which blocks this active rook and makes it less active. Black has a queenside pawn majority which can be attacked by a minority attack, trying to open up the game for white's heavy pieces on the queen side. A little minus for black would be that bishop that is looking and staring at this pawn, but again, white's position is not that comfortable. And this is why I rather don't play the English, because I don't like this kind of positions. But okay, that would be one plan with king h7 here. But c6 is another move, very flexible, and c6 must be played anyway in this position. So bishop b4, now pinning the knight. And after the free move for black, queen c1, and well, bishop d2 might be a way to attack this pawn, which could be protected by king h7, and if h5 might be provoked, then there's a hole on g5. So queen c1 makes sense. Bishop d5, neutralizing this nicely encadred bishop. a4, trying some minority attack ideas, but foremostly gaining space, because, as I said, the central pawns are rather immobile. Simply pushing the pawn would really severely damage white's pawn structure. So white has basically nothing other than to play on the queen side here. b6, stopping a5, or at least preparing c5 with gain of time. So the bishop is exchanged off, and a5. Rook a b8, and in this case you see that there is not much for white in a minority attack here. There's actually no minority attack. Rook e1, rook c8, and this rook is now vis-a-vis the queen, which is uncomfortable for every stronger player because there might be some tactics involved. So after takes, queen f4 and rook d8. The idea simply is to push the queen side pawns, and then this pawn is protected as well. If takes, and then you can push further. h4, and this flank moves, flank pawn moves don't really weaken your king position as much as it might attack the other king's position, but also this gives a retreat square or a retreat route for the queen, which we will see. King h7, preparing maybe to push f5. We don't know yet. Knight back to d2, offering an exchange of bishops, but the queen is kicked, and now you see that king move protected the pawn, so the pawn on h6 isn't hanging. h5 now to kick the queen, but this now gives this g5 square to white, which isn't that much of a problem. Again, a kick, and now this queen on h1 looks almost ridiculous. Well, there is a battery of queen and bishop, but after c5 they're really attacking air and nothing but air. Knight e4, now pointing at the weakened dark squares, especially g5. King g7, knight g5, king g7 just got out of the knight check, so b5 now, getting this pawn majority on the queen side going, and e3 by Magnus Carlsen, which is a very desperate move to make. As you see, white is just waiting and has no concrete counterplay, or well, counterplay is a word which black should be using here. White is really suffering because white has his pawn majority fixed. Black has the bishop pair for the time being, and with the idea of opening the position, these bishops become stronger and stronger. Let's look at an alternative which is rather drawish. Takes, and now we have opposite colored bishops, and with this queen f6 move, which might look silly, it makes sense if we know that we're gonna push c5, c4, maybe exchange the pawns on c4, or pushing further down as our opponent plays, and then after an exchange on c4 we can push d3, and then this battery would be opened up. Also, this queen prevents any queen f3 moves to get the queen out, and on e4 or c6 it's maybe less helpful. So queen f6 is not a bad move, that would be a variation here. But e3, which is really trying to make use of this afterwards, opened e-file to make use of the queen being vis-a-vis the rook on the same file, maybe having some tactics there. And the best way to play actually is to take, which was the game continuation, but now Anand didn't go for bishop takes b2, which would be a probably almost winning position, or winning position for black. And after rook e1, rook b6, well, there's pressure on e6, so rook b6 is understandable, and after more pressure we attack the rook, and after queen f6 we are quite ready to get started with pushing our pawns. And now you see in this open position the bishops are really strong. After exchanging on e6, queen e4, well, that activates the white pieces as much as possible, but after e5 the white heavy pieces are blocked out and the pawns are still telling. But Anand didn't go for this. He tried a more human and safer way to win the b2 pawn and push his own pawns down the board. He tried bishop d4 attacking the rook, and c4 immediately. The bishop was taken, and bishop c4 trying to stabilize and getting his queen out of the corner. And after pawn takes, we cannot take on d3 because of this tactics check, and white loses a pawn here. So after pawn takes on d3, rook d2, regaining the pawn later on with this maneuver. And now you see what black achieved is taking these two pawns, but now his pawns aren't connected anymore and are exchanged. And this is not as strong as the variation I've shown you, but again, this is a very difficult position normally. But there's one point we shouldn't forget, and this is the opposite side, opposite colored bishops, and that means this position should be a draw. And after the heavy pieces are exchanged, it is a draw, because with the heavy pieces there might be a chance to attack the opposite king. Just to understand queen d4, if there's another move instead of queen d4, white could try to attack on g7, so there's still some attacking potential, and queen d4 would be able to protect everything and push the pawn down the board if it wouldn't be taken. It's just a drawish position. The queen could be taken there, I guess, but check and king up. And there's really nothing much to say anymore. After queen g3, it is drawn because the queens are pinned and are being exchanged soon. And now you see white controls the light squares, black controls the dark squares, and neither side can break through here. So this is why this is a clearly drawish position. And after the pawns are exchanged on move 51, round 3 again is a third draw in a row, but it was a more tense game, so I hope you liked it and got something out of it. One word to this English kind of setup for white. Whenever I see this, I expect a draw in Super Grandmaster games, because the English openings aren't really that purposeful, or there aren't as many chances for white as the attacking side. And Anand knows his stuff here, and I don't think there's something for Magnus to be won in an English opening. And after we had the first moves, or the opening, let's say now the opening is over, white really had problems finding a plan. The majority in the center is fixed with this nice pawn, and there was no concrete plan for white to put any pressure to speak of to black. And I'm really missing a attacking opening for white to win a game. I want to see e4 or d4 by Magnus next time he's playing the white side. And but I hope and I think that he will win the match, because he is a stronger player. And well, we have 9 more rounds to come, and yeah, let's look forward to it. I will cover the next interesting game, so if there's short draws, don't expect me to cover it. Thank you very much for watching. Please comment, please like, share the video, spread the word, and subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much. Bye bye.